Before you hear my story, I need you to understand something. Silence can bury a life, and lies can steal decades. What I'm about to tell you isn't just about betrayal. It's about survival, about finding a voice after being erased. Stay with me, because every word carries the weight of years I can never get back. The paper trembled in my hands. The ink was fresh enough that I could almost smell it, though the certificate had been printed years ago. My eyes locked on the line that cut through me like a blade. Mother. Anna Paula. My heart stuttered. That name was not my daughter's, not my family's, not the woman who should have been standing in that space of honor. It was hers. The woman who had sat across from me at church, smiling too sweetly. The woman who whispered at parties when my back was turned. The woman I had long suspected but never dared to accuse. My husband's mistress. And there it was, sealed with the emblem of the registry office, black letters that confirmed what my soul had screamed for years, but my mouth had swallowed in silence. My grandson, the child I had rocked in my arms and kissed on his forehead, had been given her name as mother. Not mine, not my daughter's, hers. The room swayed around me. I gripped the wooden counter of the notary's office as if I were drowning, and the old oak was the last raft in a violent sea. The clerk, a young man in his 20s with eyes too tired for his age, looked at me with pity. He probably thought I was another old woman lost in bureaucracy. He couldn't know that he had just delivered the death sentence of my marriage, the silent confirmation that my husband's betrayal had never been a fleeting affair, but a life built behind my back. For years I had sacrificed myself for that man. Since 1978, when I married him in the small church of our town in Mistress'S, I gave him my youth, my body, my loyalty. I washed his clothes by hand when we had no machine. I counted coins at the end of each month to stretch food for our 2 daughters. I worked as a seamstress until my fingers bled just so we could afford the bricks for our house. In the 1990s, when inflation ate every cent we had, I sold my gold earrings, my only inheritance from my mother, to pay his debts after one of his failed business attempts. He always promised he would rise again, that my patience would be rewarded. And I believed him. God help me, I believed him. But the truth was that while I stitched dresses until midnight, he was out there, weaving another family, another history, with her. She, who was always younger, always prettier in his eyes, always free from the weight of sacrifice. She didn't sit by the bed when he was sick with fever. She didn't scrub the mold off the bathroom tiles. She didn't pawn her dreams for his comfort. No, she just waited in the shadows, and he gave her what he stole from me, his tenderness, his secrets, his time. The first time I suspected was in 1989, when a neighbor whispered to me at the market, "I saw him near the square with a woman who wasn't you." I laughed nervously, dismissed it, told myself people loved gossip, but the seed of doubt grew inside me. And then there were the late nights, the unexplained trips, the perfume that wasn't mine lingering on his shirt collar. Once, in 1994, I found a receipt in his pocket for a gold bracelet from a jeweler in Belo Horizonte. I never received that bracelet. When I asked, he snapped, "It was for business. Stop imagining things." His voice carried the authority of a man who knew I depended on him financially, emotionally, socially. I silenced myself. My daughters were still small, and I told myself I couldn't break their world apart. Years turned into decades. I thought I was protecting them. In truth, I was protecting him. And then came the impossible request. It was the winter of 2001. He came home late, smelling of whiskey, eyes red but determined. He sat at the kitchen table, where the yellow light revealed the lines in his face, and said softly, "Maria, I need you to help me with something. It's for family." He used that word like a shield. Family. As if that word erased sins. He told me a child needed to be registered, but the circumstances were complicated, and he asked me to keep it quiet. He didn't give details, only pressed my hands in his and said, "Do it for me." "For us! Don't ask." I refused at first. My instinct screamed, but then he cried. The man who had always held himself tall sobbed at my kitchen table, his head in his hands, saying, I'll lose everything if you don't help me. And like a fool, like a woman who still wanted to believe her decades of sacrifice meant something, I agreed. Now, in 2015, standing in that notary office, I understood everything. The child he had begged me to help register wasn't for some cousin or some friend. It was his own son with her. And when that boy grew, he gave him a son too, my grandson. Except the law didn't recognize me, didn't recognize my daughter, didn't recognize the truth. The paper screamed the lie louder than I ever could. I wanted to tear that certificate into pieces, but my hands only shook harder. My stomach twisted with nausea. My ears rang with the echo of his laughter, the sound of his voice telling me for decades, "You imagine too much." No, I hadn't imagined. I had just been erased. The walk home was heavy. The streets I had crossed 1,000 times suddenly felt foreign, each stone carrying the weight of betrayal. People passed by with their groceries, their small talk, their lives intact, and I wondered how many of them carried lies like mine, buried beneath polite smiles. I clutched my bag against my chest, the certificate inside burning like a secret too heavy to carry but too dangerous to drop. When I reached my house, the door creaked the same way it always had, but the sound pierced me differently. This was no longer home. It was the stage of a play where I had been cast as the fool, the faithful wife applauding a husband who had written another script in the shadows. I sat on the edge of my bed, the mattress sinking under my weight, and I whispered to the walls, how much of my life was real? And the silence answered back. The silence of that night was unbearable. It wasn't the gentle silence of a peaceful home, but the heavy kind that presses against your chest, that makes every tick of the clock sound like a hammer. I sat in the dark, the certificate still on the nightstand, its edges curling slightly under the weight of my tears. I could not sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw her name where mine or my daughter's should have been. Her name, written in clean type, stamped with legal authority, as if the universe itself had chosen her to replace me. I thought back to all the years I had carried the burden of being the pillar of the family. People in town always admired me. Maria, the strong one. Maria, the faithful wife. They had no idea that my strength was not a choice, but a prison. I remember 1982, when our first daughter was born. He didn't even show up at the hospital on time. I told the nurses he had car trouble. I told myself lies so that I didn't have to face the truth, that he was probably with her. Yet, when he finally walked in with a bouquet of cheap carnations, I smiled, because I wanted to believe he was mine. How many lies did I tell myself over the decades? In 1997, when he disappeared for 3 nights, he claimed he was handling a business deal in Rio. I cooked his favorite feijoada upon his return, though deep inside, I knew the smell of another woman's perfume clung to his suitcase. My daughters were teenagers then. I couldn't let them see me break. So I stitched my face into a smile and played the part of a happy mother, while inside, my soul bled. Years later, in 2008, I found text messages on an old Nokia phone he left charging by mistake. I didn't know the woman's name at first, only the initials, but the words, "I miss you. Our boy looks just like me. One day everything will be ours." My hands froze, the phone hot against my palm. He walked in at that exact moment, saw me, and ripped it from my grip. His eyes turned to steel. "Don't ever touch my things again," he hissed. I felt smaller than dust. That night, he didn't even try to justify himself. He just locked the phone away. And like a coward, I stayed. Because where would I go? 54 years old, no savings of my own. My life built around his shadow. And then the manipulation. Oh, how skilled he was. He would alternate between cruelty and tenderness, like a puppeteer who knew every string that made me move. When he sensed my suspicion, he would suddenly bring me flowers, or fix the leaking faucet, or take me out for ice cream at the same small parlor we visited when we were young. He would look into my eyes and say, "No one knows me like you do, Maria," and my foolish heart would melt again, as if his betrayals could be erased by a scoop of vanilla ice cream on a humid night. But the betrayal only grew, and the family I thought I was protecting became a stage for his farce. My daughters respected him, admired him, never knowing the truth. I bore the pain in silence, believing that shielding them from it was my role as a mother. What would it have done to them to know their father was not only unfaithful, but had another family living in the shadows? I told myself silence was mercy. But now, in 2015, I realized silence was complicity. My silence had given him the power to turn lies into legal truths, to give my grandson a history that erased me entirely. That night, memories of the impossible request returned like poison. He had begged me to trust him, to sign documents I didn't fully understand. "It's complicated, Maria. Please don't ask questions," he had said. His eyes glistened, his voice cracked, and I wanted so desperately to believe there was still something worth saving. So I signed where he told me to sign. That was the day I gave away my voice, and I didn't even know it. Now, the discovery felt like a cruel joke. My grandson, the boy who ran into my arms shouting "Vovo" with pure innocence, had been written into the world as someone else's bloodline. Did he know? Did my daughter know? Or had they been fooled just like me? The thought of confronting them twisted my insides. How do you look into the eyes of your child and tell her that her father's betrayal has rewritten even the name of her son? I remember the sound of the front door that evening. He came home as if nothing was wrong, humming some old tune, setting down his briefcase. His hair was grayer, his steps slower, but his arrogance was intact. He poured himself a glass of cachaça and looked at me, slouched on the sofa, clutching the certificate like a weapon. He frowned. "What's that?" he asked. My throat dried. My lips trembled. I couldn't answer at first. The anger and grief collided inside me, choking me. Finally, I whispered, "Whose name is this, João? Tell me whose name is written here." He looked at the paper, and for a split second his mask cracked. Then he smirked. A smirk. As if I were a child caught in a game I couldn't win. "You don't understand," he said softly, almost kindly. "Things are more complicated than you think." Complicated. That word again. The same word he had used to silence me 14 years earlier. My body shook with rage. "You lied to me for decades. You built another family, and now you expect me to accept it as complicated?" My voice broke, but I didn't care. My hand slammed the paper on the table. "That's my grandson, João. My flesh. My blood. And you gave him away to her." He didn't even raise his voice. He just sighed, poured himself another drink and muttered, "It's better this way." Better for who? Certainly not for me. Certainly not for the family I had sacrificed every dream to protect. In that moment, I realized I had been nothing more than an accessory in his story. A name on a marriage certificate. A cook. A caretaker. A woman who could be deceived because she believed too much. And yet, as I stared at his face under the dim kitchen light, I knew something had shifted. The silence I had carried all those years broke that night. Because I understood the truth at last. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. He had stolen my years, my dignity, and now, even my lineage. And I would not stay silent anymore. The days after that confrontation blurred into one long stretch of shadows. I walked around the house like a ghost, touching objects that suddenly felt foreign. The wedding photo on the wall, where I stood in my white dress at 21, beaming beside the man who had sworn before God and witnesses to honor me. The sewing machine in the corner, the one I had used to feed our family for years, now seemed like evidence of my servitude. Even the dining table, scratched and worn from countless meals, reminded me of how many times I had set it while he was out feeding another mouth, holding another hand. I couldn't tell anyone. My daughters called me as usual, asking if I had made canjica for the Festa Junina, if I needed help paying the electric bill. I smiled through the phone, lied through my teeth. How could I drop such a bomb into their lives? Your father has another family. Your children's names are entangled in his lies. No, I couldn't, not yet. My silence was a shield, though it burned my tongue every time I spoke to them. But the truth gnawed at me. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly, the shadows spinning with it. I thought about every sacrifice, every moment I had chosen him over myself. The year was 1985, when I had the chance to work in São Paulo with my cousin. She owned a small clothing shop and wanted me as her partner. She said I had talent, that I could make a name for myself. I refused. João told me the city was dangerous, that my place was with the family, and I obeyed. Had I gone, maybe I would have had my own life, my own independence. Instead, I stayed in that small town, stitching dresses for rich women while my own shoes had holes. And what about the money? God knows how many times I emptied my savings for him. In 1992, I remember clearly, we had 5,000 cruzeiros saved. Enough to buy a better stove, maybe even start building a second room. But he came home, pale and frantic, claiming a friend was in debt and needed help. He swore it was temporary, that he would pay me back. He never did. That money vanished into thin air. Later, I discovered he had invested it in some business with her brother. Betrayal wasn't just in his body. It was in every coin, every decision he made behind my back. The more I thought, the more I realized I had been erased piece by piece, long before that certificate. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, like water dripping on stone until the stone breaks. And I let it happen, blinded by loyalty, numbed by fear of loneliness. That realization cut deeper than the betrayal itself. One morning, I went to the notary again. I told myself I needed to see the papers one more time to make sure it wasn't some mistake, some cruel clerical error. But the clerk, with his tired eyes, only confirmed it. He showed me the file, the signatures, the stamps. Everything legal, everything clean. João's name right there, her name right there, tied together as if they had been the rightful parents of my blood. I walked out into the bright sunlight, squinting against the glare. The streets buzzed with life, children running, vendors shouting about fresh fruit, cars honking. But inside me, there was silence. A silence so loud it drowned everything else. I sat on a bench near the praça, the certificate pressed against my chest, and I wept. Not the soft tears of sorrow, but the raw sobs of a woman who had finally seen the truth in daylight. Passers-by stared. Some slowed their pace, maybe wondering if they should ask. None did, and perhaps that was best. My grief was mine alone. When I returned home, João was sitting in the living room, watching television as if the world hadn't shifted. A soap opera played, the actors crying over some invented tragedy, while the real tragedy sat in our living room with a glass of whiskey in his hand. I stood in the doorway, watching him, wondering how many times I had looked at that face and failed to see the stranger hiding inside. I asked him again, softly this time, "Why, João? Why her? Why them?" He muted the television, leaned back and said, "Because she gave me peace." Just like that. No apology, no shame. You always had demands, the house, the bills, the children. With her, I could breathe. My knees buckled, but I refused to let him see me fall. Peace? He called it peace to destroy the woman who washed his wounds, who carried his daughters, who buried her own dreams for his survival. That was not peace. That was cowardice disguised as comfort. That night, I didn't cry. Something inside me hardened. For the first time in decades, I looked in the mirror and didn't see a wife, didn't see a mother, didn't see a servant. I saw a woman robbed of her youth, of her money, of her dignity, and robbed of her rightful place in the family tree. The reflection in that mirror told me something I had ignored for too long. This story was not over. I had been silent all my life, but silence had only written me out of history. Now I had to decide if I would let it end like that, or if I would fight for my name, for my blood, for the truth. And the thought of fighting, though terrifying, felt like the first breath of air after years underwater. The decision to fight did not come in a single moment of clarity, but in waves, each one stronger than the last. At first, I told myself it was useless. What good would it do to stir up the past, to drag my daughters into the mud of their father's betrayals? But then I would hear his words echoing in my head, that chilling sentence, "She gave me peace." And I realized he had stolen not only my years, but also my right to peace, to dignity, to truth. The following week, I gathered every document I could find. Old tax forms, receipts, medical records, letters. I turned the house upside down, searching for proof that would connect the dots of his deception. In the bottom drawer of his old desk, hidden beneath yellowed papers, I found a folded photograph. It was dated 1996. There he was, standing in front of a modest house in the neighboring town, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. She was holding a baby, an infant I had never seen. His smile was broad, the kind he rarely showed at home. The date hit me like a blow. In 1996, he had told me he was traveling for work. That was the year I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat while he disappeared for days at a time. And here was the truth, frozen in glossy paper. I slammed the drawer shut and sat on the floor, the photo in my hands. My body shook as if I had been struck by fever. Every lie unraveled in front of me, every missing coin, every unexplained absence. That baby in her arms, his son, my daughter's half-brother, the child he had sworn I must not ask questions about when he begged for my signature years later. The fury that rose in me was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was humiliation, theft, desecration of everything sacred I had believed in. I thought of my mother, who had warned me on my wedding day. Maria, men like Jerome always want more. Don't let him take everything from you. I had laughed then, young and blinded by love. And now, decades later, her words rang true in my ears. Too late to save me from the abyss. I decided I could no longer stay silent. That weekend, my daughters came over with the grandchildren. The house filled with noise. The laughter of children running through the hallway, the smell of cake baking in the oven. I watched my grandson playing with toy cars on the floor, his little hands moving them in circles, his voice bright. My heart ached with love and anger. He was innocent, yet his very identity was bound to a lie. I pulled my eldest aside, into the kitchen. My hands trembled as I poured us both coffee. She noticed. "What's wrong, Mai? You look pale." I opened my mouth, but no words came. How do you tell your child that the man she called father had betrayed her entire existence? I stared at her eyes so much like mine, at the worry on her face. And in that moment, I faltered. I lied again. "I'm just tired, Filha. These last days have been heavy." She hugged me, kissed my cheek, and I swallowed the truth like poison. That night, alone in my bed, I hated myself for the silence. I hated how deeply his manipulation still ruled me, even now. But I also knew I needed a plan. Blurting out the truth would only shatter lives without purpose. If I was going to reveal his betrayal, I needed evidence strong enough to silence his denials, to show the world exactly who he was. So I began my secret investigation. Each day I went to town, pretending I was shopping or running errands. In truth, I was visiting places where he might have left traces. I spoke quietly to neighbors, to clerks, to anyone who might remember. And piece by piece, the puzzle came together. They all knew. People had seen him with her countless times. In the square, at the bakery, holding her hand at the bus stop. Some pitied me. Others had judged me for years as the wife who turned a blind eye. None had dared tell me outright. Gossip was safer than truth. The hardest blow came when I discovered that not only had he registered the boy under her name, but he had also given financial support all along. Every time he claimed we were broke, every time he said we had no money for repairs, for holidays, for small luxuries, I now knew where the money had gone. To them, he had built 2 lives, and mine was the one stripped of color, of joy, of freedom. When I confronted him again, photo in hand, he didn't deny it. He only looked tired, as if I were a nuisance interrupting his evening. "Maria," he said, "this doesn't change anything. We've lived our lives. Let the past stay in the past." But this wasn't the past. The paper in my hands, the blood in my grandson's veins. This was the present. His lies were still alive, still shaping the world my family lived in. I remember slamming the photo onto the table, my voice rising with decades of suppressed rage. "You stole my life. You stole my children's truth. And now you've stolen my grandson's name." He didn't flinch. He just poured another glass of whiskey and muttered, "You'll only hurt yourself if you keep digging." That was the moment I realized the man I had loved, defended, and sacrificed for was gone. Maybe he had died years ago, buried beneath his lies. What remained was a stranger who wore his face, a stranger who had no remorse for the wreckage he had left behind. As I sat in that kitchen staring at him, the walls of my marriage finally collapsed. There was nothing left to save, only ashes. And in those ashes, I swore I would find my truth, even if it meant burning every last illusion I had once called love. The morning after that vow, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was like stepping out of a fog. The house looked the same, the peeling paint on the window frames, the faint smell of coffee clinging to the curtains. But I no longer saw it as my home. It was a museum of sacrifices, every corner whispering the years I had given away. I told myself, enough. I began writing everything down. Every date I could remember, every absence, every coin that disappeared. I wrote like a detective assembling a case file, though the case was my life, my notebook filled with memories that tasted bitter. The time in 1983 when I sold a quilt I had stitched for months so he could invest in a friend's store. The time in 1991 when I pawned my wedding ring to pay the electric bill because he had forgotten to set money aside. All the pieces of my devotion that had been spent like loose change on another woman's comfort. It was exhausting, but it gave me strength. For the first time, I wasn't just drowning in sorrow. I was building a weapon, truth. But truth is a dangerous thing. It began to leak through me even when I tried to stay silent. My youngest daughter noticed first. One evening, she came by with pastel de carne and sat at the kitchen table. She watched me as I ate in silence. Finally, she said, "Mai, your eyes look different, like you're holding something." I looked at her, at the kindness in her face, and my throat ached with the weight of unspoken words. I wanted to tell her everything, to free myself, but the fear of breaking her world held me back. Instead, I squeezed her hand and said, "One day, Filha, not today." She didn't push, but her eyes lingered on mine, searching. Meanwhile, João carried on as if nothing had changed. He left his shoes by the door, complained about the price of meat, watched football on Sundays. To him, my rage was irrelevant. He had learned long ago that my silence was his ally. And for decades, it had been. But not anymore. One afternoon, while he was out, I went to the neighboring town. I found the modest house from the photograph, tucked on a quiet street lined with jacaranda trees. My hand shook as I approached the gate. For a moment, I thought of turning back. But then the door opened, and there she was. Ana Paula. Her hair streaked with gray now, her face older, but still carrying that smug softness I remembered from across church pews years ago. She looked at me with surprise, then caution. "Can I help you?" My voice trembled, but I forced it out. "You know who I am." Her eyes darted away, then back. She didn't deny it. She opened the gate slowly, as if bracing herself for an explosion. I stepped inside. The house smelled of beans simmering, of a life lived without shame. And there, on the wall, were photos. João with her. João with their son. João holding a baby boy I recognized instantly. The same boy who called me Vovô. My chest burned. The room tilted. I grabbed a chair to steady myself. She watched me carefully, as if I were a wounded animal. "Why?" I whispered. My voice cracked. "Why steal my life?" Her mouth twisted into something between pity and arrogance. "I didn't steal. He chose." The words pierced me deeper than any blade. He chose. That simple. As if decades of my sacrifice were nothing more than scraps discarded for her comfort. I wanted to scream, to tear those photos off the wall. But I didn't. I stood there, trembling, swallowing the storm. Because I understood in that moment that this wasn't just about him. It was about me. About what I would allow to define the rest of my years. I left without another word. The street outside felt heavier, but also clearer. I had seen the truth with my own eyes. There was no denial left, no fantasy to cling to. That night, back home. João noticed my silence and smirked, as if he already knew where I had been. He poured himself a drink and said, "Now you see it's better this way. 2 families, both cared for." I snapped. Cared for? Do you call this care? Stealing from me, lying to me, making me invisible in my own bloodline? My voice rose until it filled the house. For the first time, I didn't care if the neighbors heard. He set his glass down slowly, his expression calm, almost bored. "You always dramatize, Maria. You should thank me. Your daughters never lacked anything." That was the moment I saw it clearly. He didn't see me as a partner, as a wife, as a human. To him, I was a tool, a mask of respectability, the woman who held the facade while he lived his true life elsewhere. And I knew then that silence was no longer an option. My daughters had to know. My grandson had to know. Because if I kept quiet, his lies would remain carved into stone, while my truth would vanish with me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moon trace its path across the sky, and I planned. The next morning, I would gather my daughters. I would tell them everything, even if it shattered the family, even if it broke me. Because some truths, no matter how brutal, are the only way to reclaim the years you lost. The morning I decided to reveal the truth, I woke before dawn. My hands shook as I made coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen like a final comfort before battle. The birds were just beginning to sing, but inside me there was only the roar of fear and determination. I had carried this silence for too long. My daughters deserved to know. My grandson deserved to know. And I deserved to free myself from the weight that had bent my spine for decades. I called them both. My eldest answered first, her voice groggy. "Mai, is everything okay? It's so early." "Come to the house," I whispered. "Both of you. Today." They sensed the urgency. Within an hour they arrived with worried faces, their children still half asleep in the back seats of their cars. We sat around the table where countless birthdays had been celebrated, where homework had been done, where I had served meals cooked with tired hands and silent love. But this time, the air was heavy. João wasn't home. He had gone to the market, and that absence gave me the courage I needed. I pulled the certificate from the drawer, placed it on the table, and pushed it toward them. At first, they didn't understand. My youngest squinted at the paper. "What is this?" I pointed to the line, "Mother, Ana Paula." My eldest frowned, confusion twisting her face. "But, this isn't—" "It is," I cut her off, my voice trembling. "This is your father's lie. This is what he's done. Your children, your sons, are tied to another woman's name, his mistress, for decades." Silence fell. My daughters stared at the paper as if it were a bomb about to explode. Then the questions came, fast, sharp. "How long? Who is she? Why didn't you say anything?" Their voices tangled in panic, anger, betrayal. I tried to answer, but my words stumbled. "Since before you were born," I whispered. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought keeping silent would spare you the pain. But all I did was give him the power to write our story without us." Tears welled in my youngest's eyes. "You knew, Mun? All these years, you knew?" "Not entirely," I wanted to say. I knew pieces. I suspected shadows. But yes, in my heart, I had always known. And yet I had swallowed the truth because I believed silence was survival. Now I saw it was slow death. My eldest stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Her face hardened. I want to hear it from him. I want him to say it. The front door creaked open at that exact moment. João walked in with a bag of groceries, humming as if nothing in the world was wrong. He stopped when he saw us gathered, the certificate on the table. His eyes flicked from me to the girls. He knew. My eldest's voice cut through the air. "Pi, whose name is this?" She jabbed her finger at the paper. He set the groceries down, adjusted his shirt, and sighed. "You're making a storm out of nothing." "Nothing?" My youngest's voice cracked. "You gave our names away. You gave my son's identity to another woman, to your mistress. And you call it nothing?" His jaw tightened. For the first time, his mask slipped. I did what I had to do, he snapped. Life is complicated. You think you'd have food on this table if I hadn't made sacrifices? You think you'd have gone to school, had clothes, had anything without me? The room erupted. My daughters shouted, their voices filled with betrayal and rage. I sat frozen, watching the world I had built collapse in real time. The man they had admired, the father they had loved, was standing naked in his lies. Finally, I found my voice. It rose louder than I thought possible. Enough! Stop talking as if you were some savior. You weren't feeding us. You were feeding yourself. You didn't sacrifice. I did. Every day. Every coin. Every dream. And now we all pay the price for your cowardice. The room went silent. My words echoed against the walls. Joan looked at me with cold eyes, then turned and walked to the door. Believe what you want, he muttered. And he left. Just like that. Bags of groceries abandoned on the counter, daughters trembling in the kitchen, truth scattered across the table like shards of glass. We sat there in silence. My eldest buried her face in her hands. My youngest held my arm, her tears soaking through my sleeve. What do we do now, Mon? She asked. I didn't know. For the first time in my life, I had no script to follow. But I knew one thing. The lie was broken, and though the shards cut deep, they also let the light in. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the years ahead. I was no longer young. My body ached with age. But my spirit was awake. And I swore to myself that I would not let him erase me anymore. Not in paper, not in memory, not in blood. The battle had only begun. The house felt different after that day. The walls, which had once absorbed my silence, now echoed with the voices of truth. My daughters stopped looking at their father with blind admiration. Their eyes had changed, hardened, and every time they glanced at me, I could see the mixture of pity and guilt. They pitied the years I had endured, and they felt guilty for not seeing what was right in front of them. But how could they? I had hidden it from them, wrapped it up in smiles and warm meals, determined to protect them from the man who was supposed to protect us all. In the weeks that followed, João stayed away more often. Sometimes he disappeared for entire weekends, and no one asked where he went anymore. His authority was broken, his throne toppled. He walked through the door like a stranger, carrying the weight of his exposed lies, and for the first time, I saw my daughters refuse his embrace. They didn't call him Pai with the same tone of love. They looked at him like he was a stranger wearing their father's skin. One evening, my eldest came to me while I sat on the porch, knitting with trembling hands. She sat beside me, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the last light of the day was fading. Mai, she said softly, why didn't you leave him? The question pierced me deeper than any accusation. Why didn't I? I thought of all the moments when I could have walked away, the bruising words, the empty bed, the hidden receipts. But the answer was the same every time. Fear. Fear of raising 2 daughters alone. Fear of the judgment of a small town that would label me a failure. Fear of poverty, of loneliness, of starting again when I had already given so much. I thought I was protecting you, I whispered. I thought silence was love. She shook her head slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. But it wasn't love, mine. It was a prison. For you, for us, for everyone. Her words stayed with me long after she went inside. That night, as I lay awake, I realized she was right. My silence hadn't been protection. It had been surrender. I had surrendered my life to his lies. And in doing so, I had chained my daughters to a legacy of betrayal. The turning point came when my grandson, the child whose name had been stolen, climbed onto my lap one afternoon. He was only 6, his eyes wide with innocence. He held a drawing he had made at school, a family portrait. There was me, with gray hair and glasses, smiling beside him. There was his mother, my daughter. And there, awkwardly drawn with shaky hands, was João. Vovo? He asked. Why don't you smile when I draw Vovo? The question hit me like thunder. Out of the mouths of children comes the truth we adults fear to speak. I looked at his small, hopeful face and felt the tears well. How could I explain to a child that his very existence had been used as a weapon in a war of lies? That his place in this family tree was marked by betrayal? I kissed his forehead, my lips trembling. Because sometimes, I whispered, people draw smiles they don't feel. In that moment, I knew I couldn't allow him to grow up in a house where silence was the answer to pain. He needed to learn that truth, no matter how hard, was worth more than any lie dressed in comfort. So I made a decision. I went to see a lawyer. It wasn't easy. The office was small, the walls lined with dusty books, the air heavy with the smell of paper and ink. The lawyer, a man in his 40s with kind eyes, listened as I poured out decades of secrets. My voice shook, my hands clenched, but I didn't stop. I told him about the mistress, the other child, the certificate that had stolen my grandson's name. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Donna Maria, you've lived a lifetime of silence. But if you want justice, it won't be easy. You'll need proof, documents, witnesses. And even then, the law moves slowly. I nodded. I had spent my life moving slowly. I could wait a little longer, as long as I was walking toward freedom. Walking out of that office, the sun hit my face, and for the first time in years, I felt its warmth not as an enemy but as a promise. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but I knew one thing. Joan's lies would not be the final chapter of my story. At home, I found him sitting in the living room, as if nothing had changed, sipping his whiskey. He looked up at me and smirked. Where were you? I met his gaze without fear. Writing the truth. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. And I knew then that the years of silence had ended. The fear I saw in his eyes that night became my fuel. It was subtle, barely a flicker, but after decades of reading his expressions, I knew it was there. He wasn't untouchable anymore. For the first time, he realized that his kingdom of lies had cracks, and I was no longer the obedient queen who patched them up with silence. I began gathering more evidence, piece by piece. I returned to the notary, to the dusty archives where clerks shuffled papers without realizing how much power those pages carried. I requested copies of certificates, cross-checked names, traced dates. Every line was another stone in the wall of truth I was building. My hands trembled each time I signed for documents, but inside, I felt stronger. It was in those files that I uncovered something I hadn't expected. Not just one certificate, but several. He had registered other assets, small properties, land plots I never knew about. And on those papers, her name appeared again. Not mine, not our daughter's, hers. He had built a secret empire, brick by brick, using my labor as the foundation and her name as the crown. I walked out of that office dizzy, the folder clutched against my chest. The world spun. The street seemed tilted, but the truth was steady in my hands. I sat on a bench, the sun burning my skin, and I whispered to myself, he didn't just betray me, he erased me. At home, I hid the documents under my mattress. Each night, I pulled them out and studied them by the dim light of the lamp, my glasses slipping down my nose, my heart pounding. I no longer cried. The tears had dried. What remained was anger, sharp and clean like glass. My daughters began to see it too. One Sunday during lunch, my eldest noticed the folder. She asked what it was, and I couldn't lie anymore. I spread the documents on the table. Their eyes widened as they read. My youngest slammed her fist against the wood. He stole from us, all these years, while you worked your fingers to the bone, he was giving everything to her. Their rage was fire, but it was also dangerous. They wanted confrontation. They wanted screams. I told them, no, we don't fight with rage alone. We fight with truth. And yet part of me still shook at night. Because Joan wasn't the kind of man who surrendered easily. I knew the shadows in his eyes, the way he twisted words, the way he had always managed to turn me into the villain even when I was the one bleeding. What if he turned my daughters against me? What if, after all these years, the truth wasn't enough? The answer came one evening when my grandson climbed onto my lap again, his tiny hands holding a school project. We had to write about our family, he said proudly. showing me a page filled with childish handwriting. My throat tightened as I read. He had written my name, not hers, mine. My Ana Paula, the official papers said. But in his heart, I was his grandmother, his blood, his truth. That page, scrawled in pencil, was worth more than every legal stamp, every signature, because children know love in ways the law cannot define. That night, as I tucked the folder back under the mattress, I whispered to myself, they can steal my years, my money, my name on paper, but they cannot steal my place in his heart. Still, the battle loomed. One evening, João confronted me. He must have sensed I was building something. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his silhouette blocking the light. "What are you doing, Maria?" His voice was calm, too calm, like the stillness before a storm. I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm rewriting what you tried to erase." He chuckled, low and bitter. "You'll only make yourself look like a fool. Who will believe you after all these years? Everyone knows me. Everyone respects me. But respect built on lies is a fragile thing." I didn't say it aloud, but I knew it. The day would come when the facade he had crafted would crumble, and the truth would stand tall over the ruins. That night, I dreamed of fire, of documents burning, of walls collapsing, of voices shouting. I woke drenched in sweat, my chest heaving. But when I reached under the mattress and touched the folder, the paper was cool and real beneath my fingertips. It grounded me. It reminded me that I wasn't just dreaming anymore. I was acting. The giro inesperado, the unexpected turn, was coming. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the air shifted around me, in the way my daughters watched me not as a broken woman anymore, but as someone who had found her voice again. And I was ready. The unexpected turn came on a day I least anticipated. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of ordinary day when the air smells of bread from the bakery down the street and neighbors sweep their sidewalks. I had gone to the notary once again, determined to request copies of one last set of documents. My folder was thick now, proof piled upon proof, a silent testimony of decades stolen. As I waited in line, an older woman behind me tapped my shoulder. She looked at the papers in my hands and whispered, "You're João's wife, aren't you?" Her voice made my heart lurch. I nodded cautiously. She lowered her gaze. "I shouldn't say this, but you deserve to know. Years ago, I worked here. I was the one who processed the certificate with that woman's name. João came himself. He begged us to rush it. Said it was urgent, that the child's future depended on it. I always felt guilty, Dona Maria. But he was persuasive, and he had friends who pressured us. Now, seeing you here, I can't stay quiet anymore." Her words lit a fire in me. It wasn't just betrayal in my home. It was betrayal woven into the very system that should have protected me. He hadn't just fooled me. He had manipulated offices, people, institutions. My anger deepened, but so did my resolve. When I returned home, João was in the yard, trimming the plants as if nothing in the world was wrong. I stood there watching him, and I realized that his calmness was his greatest weapon. He lived as if lies were normal, as if reality bent itself to his will. But now, I had witnesses, documents, truth on my side. For once, I wasn't the one trembling. I confronted him again, this time with everything laid bare. I spread the documents on the table, my daughters at my side. "It's over, João," I said. My voice didn't shake. "We know about the properties. We know about the certificates. We know everything." His eyes flickered, but he tried to play his old game. "You think anyone will care? Do you think dragging this out will give you peace? You'll ruin our daughters' lives. You'll ruin yourself." But my eldest stepped forward, her voice steady. "No, Pai. You ruined everything. We're just cleaning up your mess." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. He looked at each of us, his mouth twitching as if searching for the right words, the right trick. But nothing came. For the first time, the man who had always controlled the narrative stood speechless. That night, he didn't come home. His clothes, his wallet, a few of his things were gone. The house was quieter without his presence, but not empty. because the silence was no longer oppressive. It was relief. Still, relief was not victory. The battle wasn't just against him. It was against the years of erasure, the lies cemented in official documents, the history written without me. I knew I had to continue. I had to bring this truth to light in a way that would outlive me. So I wrote. Every night, by the dim lamp, I filled page after page with my story. Not just the betrayal, but the years of sacrifice, the manipulation, the impossible requests, the laughter that hid the lies. I wrote for my daughters, for my grandson, for anyone who would one day ask who I was. I refused to let Joan's version of history be the only one that survived. One night, my youngest found me at the table, scribbling into the notebook. She read a few lines, and her eyes welled with tears. "My, this is powerful. You have to share it." I looked at her strength, and I felt something shift inside me. For years I had thought silence was strength. Now I saw that words, the truth, were the real strength. The Giro in Esperado wasn't just Joan leaving or the discovery of more lies. It was me, finding a voice I had buried under decades of obedience. Me realizing that even if the world refused to correct the documents, even if the law moved too slowly, my truth had power. Because truth lives in memory, in stories, in the voices of those who refuse to be silenced. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. When I look back now, it feels like I have lived more than one life. The girl who married in 1978, full of hope and illusions, believing that love meant sacrifice. The woman who spent decades stitching clothes late into the night, counting coins while her husband whispered lies. The mother who silenced her suspicions to keep her daughters safe, thinking silence was love. And now, this version of me, the one who finally dared to speak, to dig, to hold the truth in her hands, even when it cut like glass. Joan never returned after that night. People in town whispered. Some said he was staying with her, others that he had left altogether, perhaps to start yet another life in another city. I no longer cared. For the first time, his absence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like freedom. My daughters still struggle with the weight of what they learned. Sometimes I catch them staring into space, remembering childhood moments and wondering which of them were real, which of them were staged by a man leading two lives. But they no longer look at me with pity. They look at me with respect. They see me not as the woman who stayed, but as the woman who finally chose truth over silence. And my grandson, he still runs into my arms shouting, "Vovo!" His laughter fills the house, washing away the echoes of Joan's lies. When he sits on my lap and shows me his school drawings, I no longer feel the sting of erasure. Because paper may lie, but love does not. He knows who I am. That's enough. The reflection that stays with me is this. Sacrifice without recognition is not love. It is theft. I gave my youth, my money, my body, my loyalty, and in return I was erased, hidden behind another woman's name. But even in that erasure, I found a lesson. Silence is not protection. It is a cage. It takes your voice, your truth, your very existence, and hands it to someone else. Now, when I sit by the window in the evenings, the light of the sunset spilling across the floor, I don't feel like a victim anymore. I feel like a witness to my own survival, a witness to how far a woman can bend before she finally refuses to break. Sometimes I imagine Joan, wherever he is, sipping his whiskey, convincing himself he still holds power. But the truth is, power has shifted. It's no longer in his hands. It's in mine, in the documents I gathered, in the story I wrote, in the voices of my daughters who now see the man he truly was, in the laughter of a child who calls me Vovo and means it with all his heart. I don't know how many years I have left. My body is older, my hands ache when I sew, my back stiffens when I wake, but I know that whatever time remains, it belongs to me, not to his lies. I will not waste another day stitching a mask for someone else's betrayal. When I die, they may still find certificates with the wrong names, Papers that tell half-truths written by a man who believed he could rewrite history. But alongside those papers, my daughters will have my notebooks, my words, my testimony. They will know the full story. They will know that their mother was not blind, not weak, not erased. She was a woman who loved fiercely, who suffered deeply, but who in the end refused to remain silent. And that, I realize, is the victory. Not revenge, not punishment, but truth. Truth that cannot be buried. Truth that will outlive the lies. So I sit here now, in the quiet of my home, and I breathe freely for the first time in years. The shadows have lifted, the weight has fallen, and though the scars remain, they are proof that I survived. I whisper to myself, to the walls that once held my silence, "You did not erase me. I am still here, and that at last is enough."